The cathedral bells tolled with a finality that echoed through Felicity's very bones. As she stood before the ancient stone altar, her hands ice-cold beneath layers of ivory silk. She had prepared herself for duty, for a loveless union sealed with empty words and colder glances. The Duke of Ashford was a stranger, a name whispered in drawing rooms, a title inherited through tragedy, a man rumoured to possess a heart as impenetrable as the granite walls of his ancestral estate. Yet when his eyes met hers beneath the vaulted ceiling, something shifted in the air between them. His voice, low and certain, carried words she never expected to hear. "I've waited for you." In that moment, everything she believed about her fate shattered like morning frost beneath unexpected sunlight. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it's traveled. Felicity Ashworth had learned early that beauty could be both blessing and burden. At 22, she possessed the kind of loveliness that made heads turn in ballrooms. Dark auburn hair that caught lamplight like burnished copper, eyes the color of spring moss, and a figure that her mother's dressmaker proclaimed perfectly suited to the latest fashions from Paris. Yet these attributes, which might have brought joy to another young woman, felt to Felicity like the gilded bars of an exquisite cage. The Ashworth townhouse on Grosvenor Square stood as a testament to her family's position in London society during the height of the Regency era. Its cream-coloured facade gleamed in the afternoon sun, its windows draped in silk that cost more than most families earned in a year. Inside, every surface spoke of wealth carefully maintained through generations. Wedgwood vases positioned on mahogany tables, portraits of stern ancestors watching from panelled walls, carpets so thick that footsteps made no sound. Felicity sat in the morning room, her embroidery hoop untouched in her lap, gazing through leaded windows at the square below. Nursemaids pushed perambulators along the walkways. A flower seller called out her wares. Life, ordinary and free, continued beyond her reach. "You're wool gathering again." Her mother's voice cut through her reverie like scissors through silk. Lady Ashworth entered the room with the bearing of a woman who had never questioned her place in the world's hierarchy. "The modiste will arrive within the hour for your final fitting. I trust you'll show more enthusiasm than you've displayed these past weeks." "Yes, Mama." Felicity's response came automatically, practiced through years of compliance. "This marriage is everything we've worked toward, Felicity. The Duke of Ashford, do you comprehend what that means? His lineage traces back to the conquest. His estate spanned 3 counties. You'll be a duchess before your 23rd birthday." Lady Ashworth adjusted a perfectly arranged vase of hothouse roses. "Your father and I have secured you a position that most young women only dream of." What Felicity dreamed of, she had learned to keep locked away in the private chambers of her heart. She dreamed of choosing her own path, of conversations that ranged beyond weather and fashion, of a partnership built on mutual regard rather than strategic alliance. She dreamed, most dangerously of all, of love. The betrothal had been arranged 6 months prior, negotiated between her father and the Duke's solicitors with the efficiency of a business transaction. Felicity had met her intended husband precisely 3 times, twice at formal dinners where conversation remained safely superficial, and once during a carefully chaperoned walk through Hyde Park where they had discussed nothing more intimate than the unusually mild weather. Duke Dominic Ashford remained an enigma wrapped in impeccable tailoring. At 30 years of age, he had inherited his title unexpectedly when his elder brother perished in a riding accident. Society whispered that the tragedy had changed him, that the younger son, who had once possessed warmth and humor, had retreated behind walls of duty and formality. He was handsome in a severe way. Dark hair, grey eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people, a mouth that rarely curved into anything resembling a smile. During their encounters, he had been unfailingly polite and utterly distant. He inquired about her health, her interests in music and literature, her opinions on suitable topics. He listened to her carefully constructed responses with an attention that felt more like assessment than genuine curiosity. Never once had she glimpsed anything beyond the facade of aristocratic courtesy. "The Duke has excellent taste," her mother continued, examining Felicity with a critical eye. "He specifically requested that your wedding gown incorporate Brussels lace. The expense is considerable, but he insisted upon nothing less than perfection." Perfection. The word followed Felicity like a shadow. She must be the perfect daughter, the perfect bride, the perfect duchess. Her own desires, her own nature, must be shaped and pruned like the topiary in the square's gardens, until she fit the mold that had been prepared for her. The afternoon passed in a blur of fittings and adjustments. The modiste, Madame Beaumont, circled Felicity like a bird of prey, pinning and tucking the ivory silk until it draped with mathematical precision. The gown was undeniably beautiful. Layers of silk and lace that caught the light, seed pearls sewn in patterns that resembled frost on window panes, sleeves that fell in elegant folds from her shoulders. "Magnifique," Madame Beaumont declared, stepping back to admire her work. "You will be the most beautiful bride London has seen this season." Felicity studied her reflection in the standing mirror. The young woman who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, a porcelain figure dressed for display, lovely and lifeless. Where was the girl who had once climbed trees in the country estate's orchards, who had read forbidden novels by candlelight, who had imagined a future filled with passion and purpose? "She's gone," Felicity whispered to her reflection. "What was that, dear?" Her mother looked up from her discussion of the veil's placement. "Nothing, Mamma. I was simply admiring the craftsmanship." That evening, Felicity's father summoned her to his study, a room that smelled of leather, tobacco, and old money. Lord Ashworth sat behind his massive desk, looking every inch the successful banker whose financial acumen had restored the family fortune after his own father's poor investments. "Sit down, Felicity." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I wanted to speak with you privately before the wedding." She settled into the chair, her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect as always. "You've been an exemplary daughter," he began, his tone suggesting he was delivering a prepared speech. "Obedient, accomplished, beautiful. You've never given your mother or me a moment's concern. This marriage represents the culmination of everything we've hoped for you." "I understand, Papa." "Do you?" He leaned forward, his expression unusually earnest. "The Duke of Ashford is not a man given to displays of emotion. His position demands a certain reserve. You must not expect romance or sentiment. Your role will be to manage his households, to bear his heirs, to represent the Ashford name with dignity and grace." Each word felt like a stone added to the weight already pressing on Felicity's chest. "I will do my duty. I know you will." He opened a drawer and withdrew a velvet box. "These belong to your grandmother. She wore them on her wedding day, as did your mother. Now they pass to you." Inside the box lay a strand of pearls, each one perfectly matched, glowing with the luster of age and care. They were beautiful, valuable, and felt like a collar as her father fastened them around her neck. "There," he said, satisfaction in his voice. "You look every inch a future duchess." Felicity touched the pearls, feeling their cool smoothness against her skin. In 3 days, she would walk down the aisle of St. George's Church. In 3 days, she would become the Duchess of Ashford. In 3 days, the life she had never quite lived would end, replaced by the existence that had been chosen for her. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Felicity stood at the window and looked out at the London sky. Somewhere beyond the smoke and fog, stars were shining. Somewhere, people were making choices, following their hearts, living lives of their own design. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and allowed herself one moment of rebellion, one moment to imagine walking away, to picture a different future, to dream of a man who might look at her and see not a strategic acquisition, but a woman worth knowing. Then she drew the curtains, climbed into her bed, and reminded herself that duty was its own kind of honor. In 3 days, she would stand at the altar. In 3 days, she would speak vows that would bind her forever. In 3 days, she would discover whether the Duke of Ashford possessed any warmth beneath his aristocratic reserve, or whether she would spend the rest of her life as beautiful and untouched as the porcelain figures that decorated her mother's drawing room. The wedding dress hung in her wardrobe like a ghost of her future self. Felicity closed her eyes and tried to imagine feeling something other than resignation. She tried to imagine hope. The morning of the wedding arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if even the weather conspired to make the day memorable. Felicity woke before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety that had nothing to do with bridal nerves and everything to do with the profound sense that she was walking toward a precipice from which there would be no return. Her maid, Sarah, entered with unusual solemnity, carrying a tray of tea and toast that Felicity couldn't imagine eating. "It's a beautiful day, Miss Felicity. The sun is shining, and half of London is already gathering outside St. George's." "How wonderful," Felicity murmured, the words tasting like ash. The preparations began in earnest. Sarah helped her into the layers of undergarments, the silk stockings, the petticoats that would give the gown its proper shape. Her mother arrived to supervise, her face tight with an emotion Felicity couldn't quite identify. Pride, perhaps, or satisfaction at a plan successfully executed. When the wedding gown finally settled over Felicity's shoulders, she felt its weight like a physical manifestation of expectation. Madame Beaumont had outdone herself. The Brussels lace cascaded like frozen waterfalls, the seed pearls caught the morning light, and the silk whispered with every movement. The veil, secured with her grandmother's diamond combs, fell in gossamer layers that softened her reflection without obscuring it. "Perfect," Lady Ashworth declared, her voice catching slightly. "You are absolutely perfect." Felicity studied herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, a beautiful, hollow-eyed stranger playing the role of a bride. She touched the pearls at her throat and wondered if her grandmother had felt this same suffocating sense of inevitability on her wedding day. The carriage ride to St. George's Church in Hanover Square passed in a blur of London streets and curious onlookers. Her father sat beside her, unusually quiet, occasionally patting her hand in what she supposed was meant to be reassurance. When they arrived, the crowd outside the church had swelled to impressive proportions. Society weddings were public spectacles, and the marriage of the Duke of Ashford to the beautiful Miss Ashworth had captured the ton's imagination. Inside the church, the air was thick with the scent of white roses and beeswax candles. Every pew was filled with the cream of London society: viscounts and baronesses, members of Parliament, wealthy merchants hoping to glimpse aristocratic splendor. Felicity could feel their eyes on her as she stood in the vestibule, her hand trembling on her father's arm. "Steady now," Lord Ashworth whispered. "Remember who you are. Remember what this means for our family." The organ began its processional, the notes swelling through the vaulted space with majestic authority. Felicity took a breath, lifted her chin, and began the long walk down the aisle. Through the veil's soft filter, she could see the Duke standing at the altar, his back straight, his dark coat perfectly tailored, his profile as severe and handsome as a Roman coin. Step by step, she moved toward her future, the faces on either side blurred into a sea of curiosity and judgment. She kept her eyes fixed on the altar, on the man who would become her husband, searching for some sign of warmth, some indication that this union might contain even a spark of genuine feeling. As she drew closer, the Duke turned to face her. For a moment, their eyes met, and Felicity felt a jolt of something she couldn't name. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. His grey eyes, usually so distant, held an intensity that made her breath catch. His expression, typically so controlled, showed something that might have been emotion. Then she saw it, a flicker of his gaze toward the side of the church, a tightening of his jaw, a subtle shift in his posture that spoke of tension rather than anticipation. Felicity reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in the Duke's, and she felt the coolness of his fingers, the slight tremor that might have been nerves, or might have been something else entirely. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice rolling through the ancient words with practiced solemnity. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." The Duke's hand tightened around hers, not with affection, but with what felt like desperation. Felicity glanced up at his face and saw something that sent ice through her veins, conflict, anguish, and a kind of tortured resolve. To join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. A sound from the congregation, a soft gasp, a rustle of fabric. Felicity's peripheral vision caught movement, but she kept her eyes on the Duke, watching as his expression transformed from anguish to something harder, colder. Should anyone present know of any reason that this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever. Hold your peace. The silence that followed felt alive, pregnant with unspoken words. The Duke's fingers went rigid around Felicity's. She could see a muscle working in his jaw, could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. Then he spoke, his voice carrying through the church with devastating clarity. "I cannot do this." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Felicity felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Around them, the congregation erupted in shocked whispers, but she could only stare at the Duke, at the man who had just shattered her life in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Your Grace!" The vicar's voice trembled with confusion. The Duke released Felicity's hand as if it burned him. He turned to face the congregation, his expression now a mask of aristocratic hauteur. "I cannot marry Miss Ashworth. My affections are engaged elsewhere." The whispers became a roar. Felicity stood frozen, her mind unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare from which she would wake. "Dominic, what are you doing?" A woman's voice, sharp with alarm, came from the front pew. The Dowager Duchess, the Duke's mother, half rose from her seat. But the Duke's attention had shifted to someone in the congregation. Felicity followed his gaze and saw a young woman standing in one of the side pews, blonde, beautiful, her face flushed with emotion. Lady Charlotte Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Westmere, and Felicity's own cousin. "Charlotte and I have formed an attachment," the Duke continued, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "An attachment of the heart that I cannot in good conscience ignore. I will not trap Miss Ashworth in a loveless marriage when my heart belongs to another." Charlotte moved forward, her eyes shining with tears and something that looked horribly like triumph. "Dominic, you don't have to do this here." "Yes, I do." He turned back to Felicity, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been pity. "Miss Ashworth, you deserve better than a husband who cannot love you. I release you from this engagement. I hope someday you will understand that I do this as much for your sake as my own." The words were meant to be kind, perhaps, but they landed like blows. Felicity stood in her perfect dress, surrounded by hundreds of people, and felt herself crumbling from the inside out. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute, that she couldn't even find words to respond. Her father's voice cut through the chaos. "You cannot do this. The contracts are signed. The settlements agreed upon." "I will pay whatever penalties are required," the Duke replied coldly, "but I will not marry your daughter." Lady Ashworth's wail of distress echoed through the church. Friends and enemies alike stared at Felicity with expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed glee. She could already hear the gossip that would follow her for the rest of her life, jilted at the altar, rejected in front of all of London, abandoned for her own cousin. Charlotte reached the Duke's side, and he took her hand with a tenderness he had never shown Felicity. "I'm sorry," he said to the congregation, "but I will not live a lie." Felicity finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You've known her all along." And the Duke had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Our attachment developed recently. I tried to honor my commitment to you, but I cannot deny what I feel for Charlotte. How noble, Felicity heard herself say, surprised by the bitterness in her tone. To discover your heart's truth on our wedding day. How very convenient for you both. She turned to Charlotte, her cousin, the girl she had played with as a child, who had attended her engagement party with smiles and congratulations. Did you enjoy watching me prepare for this day? Did it amuse you, knowing what you planned? Charlotte had the decency to flush. Felicity, it wasn't like that. We didn't mean for this to happen. Love doesn't follow rules or schedules. No, Felicity agreed, her voice growing stronger even as her world collapsed. But decency does. Honor does. Loyalty does. She gathered her skirts, the beautiful silk and lace that had been chosen with such care, and turned to walk back down the aisle. Every eye in the church followed her, every whisper cut like a knife. Her parents called after her, but she couldn't stop, couldn't stay in that place for another moment. The crowd outside the church had grown, expecting to shower the happy couple with rose petals. Instead, they parted in confused silence as Felicity emerged alone, her veil streaming behind her, her face pale but composed. She climbed into the waiting carriage without assistance, without looking back, without allowing herself to feel anything beyond the desperate need to escape. As the carriage pulled away from St. George's, away from the wreckage of her future, Felicity finally allowed herself to break. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, wrenching and raw. She had been humiliated, betrayed, abandoned, not just by a man she barely knew, but by family, by society's promises, by every assurance that obedience and duty would be rewarded. The golden cage had opened, but not in the way she had ever imagined. She was free, but the freedom tasted like ashes and shame. The Ashworth townhouse became a prison of whispers and pitying glances. For 3 days, Felicity remained in her bedchamber, unable to face the world that had witnessed her humiliation. Her mother alternated between weeping fits and rage-filled tirades about the Duke's dishonor. Her father closeted himself in his study, consulting with solicitors about breach of contract and financial recompense. The servants moved through the halls with careful quietness, as if the house itself were in mourning. On the 4th morning, salvation arrived in the form of a letter written in bold, decisive handwriting. Felicity broke the seal with trembling fingers and read, "My dearest niece, I have heard of the disgraceful events at St. George's. That pompous fool and your treacherous cousin have behaved abominably, and London society has shown its true colours in their gleeful dissection of your misfortune. You must come to me immediately. I am in Bath for the season, and here you will find respite from the vultures. Pack your things. I expect you within the week. Your devoted aunt, Agatha Blackwood." Aunt Agatha, her father's elder sister, a widow of independent means and even more independent spirit. She had scandalized the family years ago by refusing to remarry after her husband's death, choosing instead to travel, to read philosophy, to host salons where ideas mattered more than titles. Lady Ashworth considered her a bad influence. Lord Ashworth tolerated her with bemused exasperation. Felicity had always found her fascinating. "Absolutely not," her mother declared when Felicity announced her intention to accept the invitation. "You will remain here where we can manage this situation properly. We must present a united front, show society that we are not defeated." "I am defeated, Mamma." Felicity's voice was quiet but firm. "I stood at an altar and was rejected in front of everyone we know. There is no managing that. There is only surviving it, and I cannot do that here." Her father, surprisingly, intervened. "Let her go, Margaret. Agatha is right. Bath will provide distance from the gossip. Perhaps by next season this will have faded enough for Felicity to re-enter society." "Next season?" Lady Ashworth's voice rose to a near shriek. "You think anyone will have her after this? She's ruined." The word hung in the air like a curse. Ruined. Not through any fault of her own, but ruined nonetheless. Felicity felt something harden inside her chest, a kernel of anger that had been growing since she walked down that aisle alone. "Then I have nothing left to lose," she said quietly. "I'm going to Bath." The journey took 2 days. And with each mile that separated her from London, Felicity felt as though she could breathe a little more easily. The countryside rolled past the carriage windows, green fields giving way to gentle hills, the landscape softening as they approached the elegant spa city that had been fashionable since Roman times. Bath greeted her with honey-coloured stone buildings and the promise of anonymity. Aunt Agatha's residence on the Royal Crescent was smaller than the London townhouse, but infinitely more welcoming. The moment Felicity stepped through the door, she was enveloped in her aunt's embrace, a fierce hug that smelled of lavender and old books. "There you are," Agatha said, pulling back to study Felicity's face with sharp grey eyes. "Thinner than you should be, and with shadows under your eyes that no young woman should carry, but you're here, and that's what matters." Agatha Blackwood was 60 years old and magnificent. Her silver hair was arranged in a style 20 years out of fashion. Her dress was comfortable rather than fashionable, and her expression held the kind of intelligence that made most people slightly uncomfortable. She had been beautiful once. Now she was something better, formidable. "Come, sit, tell me everything, and don't spare the details. I want to know exactly how that insufferable Duke and your viper of a cousin conducted themselves." Over tea and seed cake, Felicity recounted the entire story. Agatha listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively more severe. When Felicity finished, her aunt set down her teacup with decisive force. "The Duke is a coward and a fool. Charlotte is a scheming little opportunist who will discover that a man who abandons one woman at the altar is perfectly capable of doing it again. But you, my dear, are well rid of them both." "I don't feel well rid of anything," Felicity admitted. "I feel humiliated and lost. Everything I was raised to be, everything I prepared for, it's gone. What am I supposed to do now?" "Whatever you wish." Agatha leaned forward, her eyes bright with conviction. "Don't you see, Felicity? You've been given an extraordinary gift. You're free. No husband to dictate your days, no household to manage according to someone else's preferences, no expectations beyond those you set for yourself. Yes, society will gossip. Yes, some doors will close. But other doors, more interesting doors, will open. What doors could possibly be open to a woman jilted at the altar? The doors that were always closed to you as a future duchess. The doors to genuine friendship, intellectual pursuit, authentic experience. Bath isn't London, my dear. Here we have a different sort of society. Writers, artists, philosophers, scientists. People who care more about what you think than who you were supposed to marry." Over the following weeks, Felicity discovered that her aunt spoke the truth. Bath society operated by different rules than London's rigid hierarchy. Agatha introduced her to a circle of individuals unlike anyone Felicity had encountered in her carefully controlled life. There was Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a novelist who published under a male pseudonym and whose books Felicity had secretly devoured. There was Mr. Benjamin Cross, a natural philosopher who studied geology and spoke passionately about the age of the earth. There was Miss Sarah Thornton, an artist whose watercolors captured light in ways that seemed almost magical. And there was Dr. Damien Reed. Felicity met him at one of Agatha's weekly salons, gatherings where conversation ranged from politics to poetry, where ideas were debated with vigor and wit. He arrived late, apologizing for an emergency at the hospital where he worked, a charitable institution that treated patients regardless of their ability to pay. "Dr. Reed is something of a radical," Agatha said with obvious approval. "He believes that medical care should be available to all, not just those who can afford private physicians. He's also brilliant, stubborn, and entirely too handsome for his own good." Felicity looked up from her teacup and felt her breath catch. Dr. Reed was indeed handsome, but not in the polished, aristocratic way of the Duke. His attractiveness was warmer, more immediate, dark blonde hair slightly disheveled, hazel eyes that held both intelligence and kindness, a mouth that curved easily into a smile. He wore his evening clothes with the air of a man who found them slightly ridiculous but necessary. "Miss Ashworth," he said, when Agatha introduced them, and his voice held genuine interest rather than polite formality. "Your aunt has told me you've recently arrived from London. How are you finding Bath?" "Surprisingly liberating," Felicity answered honestly, then felt herself flush. "That is, the air here seems particularly healthful." His smile widened. "The air, yes, though I suspect it's the company rather than the atmosphere that provides the real benefit. London society can be rather suffocating." "I understand." There was no pity in his expression, no hint that he knew of her humiliation. Either Agatha had been discreet, or he simply didn't care about London gossip. Either way, Felicity felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before the wedding. "Do you enjoy your work at the hospital, Dr. Reed?" she asked, genuinely curious. His face lit with enthusiasm. "Immensely. Medicine is advancing so rapidly, new techniques, new understandings of disease and treatment. And to be able to apply that knowledge to help people who would otherwise suffer without care, there's no greater privilege." They talked for an hour, the conversation flowing with an ease Felicity had never experienced with the Duke. Dr. Reed asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers. He challenged her thoughts without dismissing them. He made her laugh with wry observations about Bath's more eccentric residents. When he finally took his leave, promising to attend the next salon, Felicity realized she was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in weeks. "He's not titled," Agatha observed after he'd gone. "He's not wealthy. He's the third son of a country vicar, educated through scholarships and his own determination. By London standards, he's entirely unsuitable." "By London standards, I'm ruined," Felicity replied. "Perhaps we're well matched." Her aunt's laugh was delighted. "Perhaps you are." As spring turned to summer, Felicity found herself transformed by Bath's gentler rhythms. She attended lectures at the assembly rooms, walked along the River Avon with new friends, read books that challenged her thinking, and discovered that she possessed opinions on subjects she'd never been encouraged to consider. She learned that she enjoyed debate, that she had a talent for watercolor painting, that she could make people laugh with carefully observed wit. And she saw Dr. Reed regularly. He became a fixture at Agatha's salons, and gradually their acquaintance deepened into something that felt like friendship, and perhaps, tentatively, something more. He never asked about her past, never treated her as damaged or pitied. He simply saw her as Felicity, a woman worth knowing for her own sake. One evening, walking back from a concert at the Pump Room, Dr. Reed offered his arm and said quietly, "Your aunt mentioned that you experienced some difficulty in London. I want you to know that whatever happened there has no bearing on my regard for you. I judge people by who they are, not by society's arbitrary pronouncements." Felicity felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "I suspect I know more than you think." His smile was gentle. "Bath is small enough that gossip travels even here. But I also know that you're intelligent, kind, and possess a strength that many people never develop. Whatever London thinks of you is London's loss and Bath's gain." In that moment, standing on a Bath Street corner with the summer evening soft around them, Felicity felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition that perhaps her story wasn't over, perhaps it was only just beginning. Summer in Bath brought with it an influx of visitors seeking the healing waters and fashionable society. Among them, to Felicity's dismay, came members of the London Ton, families who divided their time between the capital and the spa city, bringing with them all the gossip and judgment she had hoped to escape. The first time she encountered someone from her former life, Felicity was walking through Sydney Gardens with Dr. Reed and Miss Thornton. Lady Pemberton, Charlotte's mother and Felicity's aunt by marriage, approached with two other matrons, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and malicious satisfaction. "Felicity, my dear," Lady Pemberton cooed, her voice dripping false sympathy. "How brave of you to show your face in public, and with such unconventional company." Her gaze swept dismissively over Dr. Reed's unfashionable coat. Felicity felt Dr. Reed tense beside her, but before she could respond, he spoke with perfect courtesy. "Dr. Damien Reed, at your service. And you must be Lady Pemberton. Miss Ashworth has mentioned your family." The emphasis on "mentioned" carried just enough weight to suggest that what had been said was not complimentary. Lady Pemberton's smile faltered. "I trust your daughter is well?" Felicity asked, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I understand she and the Duke are to be married next month. How fortunate that true love prevailed." The sarcasm was delicate enough to be deniable, but sharp enough to draw blood. Lady Pemberton's companions exchanged glances, and Felicity could see the calculation in their eyes. This was not the broken, humiliated girl they had expected to find. "Charlotte is very happy," Lady Pemberton replied stiffly. "The Duke is devoted to her." "How wonderful! I hope she finds everything she deserves." Felicity smiled sweetly, and the double meaning hung in the air like perfume. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we were just discussing Dr. Reed's fascinating work at the hospital. He's pioneered a new technique for treating fever that has reduced mortality rates by nearly 30%. It's quite revolutionary." She turned away, effectively dismissing her aunt, and continued walking with her companions. Only when they were out of earshot did she allow herself to tremble. "That was magnificently done," Miss Thornton said admiringly. "You've developed quite a spine since arriving in Bath." "I've had excellent teachers," Felicity replied, glancing at Dr. Reed, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You shouldn't have to defend yourself or your companions," he said quietly. "The fault lies entirely with those who judged you." "Perhaps. But I find I no longer care what they think. Their opinions held power over me only as long as I granted it." That evening Aunt Agatha announced that she was hosting a grand assembly at the upper rooms, a ball that would serve as Felicity's formal reintroduction to society, but on their own terms. "We'll invite everyone who matters in Bath," Agatha declared, her eyes gleaming with strategic intent. "The intellectuals, the artists, the progressive thinkers, and yes, we'll invite the London crowd too. Let them see that you're not hiding in shame, but thriving in a world that values substance over superficial propriety." "Aunt Agatha, I'm not certain I'm ready." "Nonsense. You're more than ready. You've spent 3 months discovering who you are, beyond society's expectations. Now it's time to show them." The preparations consumed the following week. Felicity found herself caught up in Agatha's enthusiasm, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the color of her eyes, practicing the latest dances with Miss Thornton, and trying to calm the butterflies that seemed to have taken permanent residence in her stomach. The night of the assembly arrived with perfect weather, warm but not oppressive, with a breeze that carried the scent of summer flowers through the upper room's open windows. Felicity stood beside her aunt, greeting guests as they arrived, and was surprised by the genuine warmth she received from Bath's regular society. Mrs. Hartwell embraced her. "You look radiant, my dear, like a woman who's finally stepped into her own light." Mr. Cross bowed over her hand. "Save me a dance, Miss Ashworth. I promise not to lecture you about sedimentary rock formations for more than half of it." And Dr. Reed, arriving in evening clothes that actually fit properly for once, looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "But then, you always are." The ballroom filled quickly. Music swelled from the orchestra. Couples took to the floor in swirls of silk and candlelight. Felicity danced with Mr. Cross, then with a young poet who quoted Byron between steps, then with a visiting professor from Oxford who discussed ancient Greek philosophy with infectious enthusiasm. She was laughing at something the professor said when she saw them. The Duke and Charlotte, entering the ballroom with the Dowager Duchess and Lady Pemberton. The laughter died in her throat. Charlotte looked beautiful in pale pink silk, diamonds glittering at her throat, diamonds that should have been Felicity's, part of the Ashford family jewels. The Duke looked exactly as he always had, handsome, remote, perfectly composed. His grey eyes swept the room and landed on Felicity with an impact she felt like a physical blow. "Steady," Dr. Reed's voice came from beside her. She hadn't noticed him approach. "You don't have to speak to them if you don't wish to." "No," Felicity said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I think I do." She crossed the ballroom with Dr. Reed at her side, aware of the sudden hush that fell over nearby conversations, the avid eyes watching to see what would happen. The Duke and Charlotte stood frozen, clearly not having expected this direct confrontation. "Your Grace," Felicity said, her curtsy perfectly correct. "Lady Charlotte, how unexpected to see you in Bath. I trust you're both well." The Duke's expression flickered with something that might have been discomfort. "Miss Ashworth, you look well." "I am well. Remarkably so, actually. Bath has been extraordinarily restorative." She turned to Charlotte with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand congratulations are in order. Your wedding is next month, I believe?" Charlotte's hand tightened on the Duke's arm. "Yes, we're very happy. I'm delighted to hear it. Truly, you've done me an enormous favor. I've discovered that the life I thought I wanted was actually a gilded cage. You've freed me to find something far more valuable, authenticity." She gestured to Dr. Reed. "May I introduce Dr. Damien Reed? He's doing groundbreaking work in medicine and is one of the finest minds I've had the pleasure to encounter." Dr. Reed bowed, his manner courteous but cool. "Your Grace." "Lady Charlotte." The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Dr. Reed, taking in the unfashionable coat, the lack of title, the obvious intelligence and quiet confidence. "A doctor, how practical." "Indeed," Dr. Reed replied evenly. "I find saving lives more fulfilling than managing estates, though I'm sure both have their merits." The subtle insult landed perfectly. The Duke's jaw tightened, and Felicity felt a surge of satisfaction. This was not the broken girl he had left at the altar. This was a woman who had found her strength and her voice. "We should return to our party," Charlotte said quickly, clearly sensing the tension. "It was interesting to see you, Felicity." "Likewise, cousin." Felicity's smile was sharp as glass. "Do enjoy the evening. Bath society is quite different from London's. We value character over titles here. You may find it refreshing, or perhaps not." As they walked away, Felicity felt Dr. Reed's hand at the small of her back, a gesture of support and something more. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "I was angry," she admitted, "but also liberated. Seeing them together, I realized I feel nothing but relief. Whatever I thought I wanted from that marriage was an illusion." "And what do you want now?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Felicity looked up at him, at this man who had shown her what genuine regard looked like, who valued her mind as much as her appearance, who saw her as a partner rather than a possession. "I want to choose my own path," she said softly. "I want to live authentically. I want—" She hesitated, then decided to be brave. "I want to explore what this is between us, if you're willing." His smile was like sunrise. "I've been waiting for you to say that for weeks. Miss Ashworth, would you do me the honor of the next dance?" "I would be delighted, Dr. Reed." As they moved onto the dance floor, Felicity was aware of the watching eyes, the whispered speculation. She saw the Duke standing at the edge of the ballroom, his expression unreadable as he watched her waltz past in Dr. Reed's arms. She saw Charlotte's pinched face, the realization that her victory might not be as complete as she'd imagined. But mostly, Felicity was aware of the man holding her, of the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the room, of the rightness of this moment. The music swelled, and she let herself be carried by it, by the joy of movement and possibility. "There's something I should tell you," Dr. Reed said as they turned. "I've been offered a position in Edinburgh, a teaching post at the medical school, with the opportunity to continue my research. It's an extraordinary opportunity." Felicity's heart sank. "That's wonderful. You should absolutely accept." "I haven't yet. Because accepting would mean leaving Bath. Leaving—" He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Leaving you, unless you might consider coming with me." Not immediately, of course, but perhaps in time, if your feelings align with mine. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you might be open to the possibility of a future together, one where we're partners in every sense, intellectual, emotional, practical, one where you're free to pursue your own interests while I pursue mine, one built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than social obligation. Felicity felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Dr. Reed, Damien, I think I would very much like to explore that possibility. His smile was radiant. Then I'll write to Edinburgh tomorrow and tell them I'll need housing suitable for two. As the dance ended, he led her from the floor, and Felicity caught one last glimpse of the Duke. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room, and she saw in his expression something that looked like regret. But it was too late for regrets, too late for second thoughts. She had found her path forward, and it led away from everything she'd once thought she wanted towards something infinitely better, a life of her own choosing. The morning after the assembly, Bath society buzzed with speculation. Felicity Ashworth, the girl jilted at the altar, had not only faced down the Duke and her treacherous cousin with remarkable composure, but had also been seen in intimate conversation with the handsome Dr. Reed. By afternoon, the gossip had evolved into something more substantial, whispers of an understanding between them, of a possible engagement. Felicity sat in Aunt Agatha's morning room, reading the letter that had arrived with the early post. Dr. Reed's handwriting was precise and confident, his words carefully chosen, yet warm with feeling. "My dear Miss Ashworth, I hope I did not speak too presumptuously last evening. The joy of dancing with you, of seeing you face your past with such courage, emboldened me to speak of futures that perhaps should have remained unspoken until more time had passed. Yet I find I cannot regret my honesty. You have become essential to my happiness in ways I did not anticipate. If my proposal of Edinburgh, of a life built together, was premature, I beg your patience. I am willing to wait as long as necessary for your heart to be certain. Yours with deepest regard, Damien Reed." "He's a good man," Agatha observed from her chair by the window. "Intelligent, principled, genuinely kind. Your parents will despise him, of course, because he lacks a title and fortune." Felicity folded the letter carefully. "Because he represents everything they tried to prevent, your independence. A duke they could control through you. A doctor who values your mind, that terrifies them." As if summoned by the conversation, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Lord and Lady Ashworth. They had travelled from London overnight, their faces drawn with exhaustion and barely contained fury. "Leave us," Lady Ashworth commanded Agatha imperiously. "This is my house, Margaret. I'll leave when I choose." Agatha settled more firmly into her chair. "Say what you've come to say." Lord Ashworth's face was mottled with anger. "We've heard the most disturbing rumours, that you've been seen in compromising situations with some country doctor, that you're considering an engagement to a man of no consequence whatsoever." "Dr. Reed is a man of considerable consequence," Felicity replied calmly. "He's saved countless lives, advanced medical knowledge, and conducts himself with more honour than many titled gentlemen I could name." "He's nobody," her mother shrieked. "The third son of a vicar. No estate, no connections, no prospects beyond a modest salary. After everything we've sacrificed for you—" "Sacrificed?" Felicity stood, her composure cracking. "You sacrificed nothing. You arranged a marriage that would elevate our family's status. You never once asked what I wanted, what I dreamed of, who I might wish to become. And when that arrangement collapsed in the most humiliating way possible, you were more concerned about your own embarrassment than my heartbreak." "We were concerned about your future." Lord Ashworth slammed his hand on the table. "Without a proper marriage, you have nothing. You are nothing. Then I choose to be nothing by your standards and everything by my own." Felicity's voice was steady, certain. "I'm 22 years old. I have a small inheritance from grandmother, not much, but enough to live modestly. I don't need your approval or your support." Lady Ashworth's face went white. "If you pursue this madness, if you attach yourself to this unsuitable man, you are no daughter of mine. We will cut you off completely. No inheritance beyond what you already possess, no family connection, no support of any kind." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Felicity felt Agatha's hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity. She thought of Dr. Reed's letter, of the life he offered, uncertain, unconventional, but authentic. She thought of the woman she had become in Bath, the strength she had discovered, the possibilities that stretched before her like an open road. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss," Felicity said quietly. "I'm sorry you cannot see that happiness matters more than status. I'm sorry you believe a title is worth more than genuine affection, but I will not sacrifice my chance at a real life to satisfy your ambitions." Her parents left in a storm of outrage and dire predictions. When the door closed behind them, Felicity sank into a chair, trembling with the enormity of what she had done. "You've just chosen yourself over everything you were raised to value," Agatha said softly. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying. Liberating." "Right." Felicity looked up at her aunt. "Is this how you felt when you refused to remarry?" "Exactly so, and I've never regretted it for a moment." Agatha smiled. "Now, I believe you have a letter to answer." Felicity's response to Dr. Reed was brief but decisive. She asked him to call that afternoon, and when he arrived, she received him in the drawing room with her heart pounding against her ribs. "My parents came this morning," she said without preamble. "They've disowned me for considering an attachment to you. They believe you're unsuitable, that I'm throwing away my future." Dr. Reed's expression darkened. "Felicity, I never meant to cause a breach with your family. If you need time, I don't need time. I need to know if your offer was genuine. If you truly meant what you said about Edinburgh, about a partnership, about building a life together." "I meant every word." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "But I won't let you sacrifice your family for me. That's too great a cost." "They sacrificed me first," Felicity said firmly. "They never saw me as a person, only as a piece in their social strategy. You see me, Damien. You value my thoughts, my opinions, my dreams. You offer me a partnership instead of ownership. That's worth more than all the titles and estates in England. Are you certain? Because once we take this step, there's no going back. Society will judge you harshly for marrying so far beneath your station." "Let them judge. I've learned that the only opinions that matter are those of people who actually know and care for me. Everyone else is just noise." She squeezed his hands. "So yes, Dr. Reed, I am certain. If you'll still have me, I would very much like to go to Edinburgh with you, as your wife." His smile was incandescent. "Then I am the most fortunate man in Britain." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I bought this weeks ago, hoping for this moment, but not daring to believe it would come. It's not much." The ring was simple gold with a small emerald, modest by society standards, but perfect in its sincerity. Felicity felt tears slip down her cheeks as he slid it onto her finger. "It's everything," she whispered. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at Bath Abbey. Aunt Agatha stood as witness, along with Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Thornton and Mr. Cross. There was no grand congregation, no elaborate gown, no society spectacle. Just two people choosing each other freely, speaking vows that meant something because they were given rather than obligated. As Felicity stood beside Damien, repeating the ancient words, she thought of that other altar, that other wedding that never was. She had stood there trembling, expecting duty and coldness. Now she stood steady, receiving love and partnership. The contrast was so profound, it took her breath away. "I do," she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. When they emerged from the Abbey into autumn sunshine, a small crowd had gathered. Not society gossips, but the friends they had made in Bath, people who valued them for who they were, rather than what they represented. The applause was genuine, the well wishes heartfelt. A carriage waited to take them to the coaching inn, where they would begin their journey to Edinburgh. As Damien helped her inside, Felicity caught sight of a familiar figure standing apart from the crowd. The Duke of Ashford, alone, watching with an expression of profound regret. For a moment their eyes met. Felicity felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering pain. Just a distant recognition of a path not taken, a life that would have been wrong in every way that mattered. She turned away from him and toward her husband, toward the future they would build together. The carriage pulled away from Bath, carrying her toward Scotland, toward a new life, toward possibilities she had never imagined when she stood trembling at that first altar. "Regrets?" Damien asked softly, watching her face. "Not a single one." Felicity laced her fingers through his. "I was so afraid that day in St. George's. I thought my life was ending. I didn't realize it was the beginning of everything that mattered." "Our beginning," he corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. "Our beginning," she agreed and smiled as the English countryside rolled past the windows, each mile taking her further from the woman she was supposed to be and closer to the woman she had chosen to become. The golden cage had opened, and she had flown free. Not into chaos or ruin, as her parents predicted, but into a life of purpose, partnership, and genuine love. It was not the life society had planned for her. It was infinitely better. As evening fell and they stopped at a coaching inn for the night, Felicity stood at the window of their room, looking out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Damien came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Extraordinarily so." She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the rightness of this choice. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to myself. Thank you for being brave enough to choose an uncertain future over a certain prison." They stood together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and expectations, and Felicity knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the expected choice, but the true one. And that made all the difference. Edinburgh greeted them with grey skies and a wind that cut through even the heaviest wool, but Felicity found the city's austere beauty captivating. The medieval old town rose in dramatic tiers of stone, while the elegant new town spread in geometric precision, a testament to Enlightenment ideals. It was a city of scholars and thinkers, where ideas mattered more than lineage, and Felicity felt herself breathing more freely with each passing day. Their home was a modest flat on George Street, with large windows that overlooked the Firth of Forth in the distance. It was nothing like the grand houses Felicity had known, but it was theirs, filled with Damien's medical texts, her growing collection of books, and the comfortable disorder of two people building a life together. Damien's position at the medical school consumed much of his time, but the work energized him in ways Felicity found beautiful to witness. He lectured to eager students, conducted research on infectious diseases, and continued his charitable work at the Royal Infirmary. Often, Felicity accompanied him on his rounds, assisting in ways that would have scandalized London society, holding instruments, comforting patients, learning the practical applications of medical science. "You have a gift for this," Damien told her one afternoon as they walked home from the hospital. "Mrs. McGregor was terrified of the surgery until you spoke with her. You calmed her in ways I couldn't, perhaps because I understand what it's like to feel powerless," Felicity replied, "to have decisions made about your body, your future, without your consent. I simply treated her as I wished to be treated, as a person capable of understanding and choosing." He stopped walking and pulled her into an embrace, heedless of the passers-by on the busy street. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not since breakfast," she teased, but her heart swelled with the joy of hearing it. Even after 6 months of marriage, the words still felt like a gift. But Felicity's life in Edinburgh extended beyond the hospital. Through Damien's colleagues, she had been introduced to a circle of remarkable women, wives of professors, writers, reformers, who met weekly to discuss everything from literature to politics to the radical notion of women's education. Mrs. Catherine Morrison, wife of a philosophy professor, became a particular friend. She was organizing a school for working-class girls, teaching them not just needlework and domestic skills, but reading, mathematics, and critical thinking. "We need teachers," Catherine said one afternoon over tea in Felicity's sitting room. "Women who understand that education is liberation. Would you consider it?" "I'm not qualified," Felicity protested. "I had governesses and masters, but I've never taught." "You're intelligent, patient, and passionate about learning. That's all the qualification you need. The rest you'll learn by doing." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes bright with conviction. "These girls have so few opportunities. You could change their lives." Felicity thought of her own education, designed to make her an ornament rather than a thinker. She thought of the books she'd been discouraged from reading, the opinions she'd been taught to suppress, the potential that had nearly been wasted in service to social expectations. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." Teaching proved to be both challenging and profoundly rewarding. Her students, girls aged 10 to 16 from Edinburgh's poorest neighbourhoods, arrived sceptical and wary. They had been taught that education was not for the likes of them, that their futures held only domestic service or factory work. Felicity began with stories. She read them novels and poetry, showed them that literature could reflect their own experiences and dreams. She taught mathematics through practical problems, calculating wages, measuring fabric, understanding interest rates. She encouraged them to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, to believe in their own capacity for thought. One student in particular captured Felicity's attention. Margaret Campbell, 14 years old, possessed a fierce intelligence and a hunger for knowledge that reminded Felicity of herself. The girl devoured every book Felicity lent her, asked questions that demonstrated remarkable insight, and dreamed of becoming a teacher herself. "Is it possible, Mrs. Reed?" Margaret asked one day after class, "for someone like me to have a real education, to be more than a servant?" Felicity thought of her own journey from gilded cage to genuine freedom. "It's possible if you're willing to work for it, to face opposition, to believe in yourself when others don't. It won't be easy, Margaret, but yes, it's possible." She began tutoring Margaret privately in the evenings, preparing her for the entrance examinations to the teacher training college. Damien supported the endeavour enthusiastically, often joining their sessions to discuss science and philosophy. "You're building something important," he told Felicity one night as they prepared for bed. "Not just teaching facts, but showing these girls that they have value beyond what society assigns them. That's revolutionary work." "It's what I wish someone had shown me earlier," Felicity replied. "That my worth wasn't determined by who I married or how well I managed a household, but by who I chose to be." As winter gave way to spring, news from England arrived in sporadic letters. Aunt Agatha wrote regularly, her correspondence full of Bath gossip and encouragement. Mrs. Hartwell sent copies of her latest novel. Miss Thornton included sketches of Scottish landscapes she hoped to visit. But there was other news too, less welcome. Charlotte's marriage to the Duke had taken place as planned, a grand affair at his country estate. According to Agatha's sources, the union was already showing cracks. The Duke remained distant and preoccupied with estate matters. Charlotte, accustomed to being the centre of attention, found herself isolated in the vast Ashford manor, her husband's affection apparently cooling now that the chase was over. "I should feel satisfaction," Felicity told Damien as she read Agatha's latest letter. "They betrayed me terribly, but I just feel nothing. Perhaps pity." "That's because you've moved beyond it," Damien said. "They're still trapped in the same shallow world, playing the same empty games. You found something real." In May, Felicity received an unexpected letter bearing her mother's handwriting. She stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal, her heart pounding with apprehension. "Felicity, I write to inform you that your father has been ill. The doctors say his heart is weak. He asks for you. I know we parted badly, and perhaps things were said that cannot be unsaid. But he is your father, and he wishes to see you before... I cannot write the words. If you have any filial feeling remaining, please come. Your mother, Margaret Ashworth. Felicity showed the letter to Damien, her hands trembling. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to refuse, to let them feel the abandonment they inflicted on me. But another part knows that you would regret not going. Damien finished gently. You're not cruel, Felicity. It's one of the things I love most about you. If you need to see your father, we'll go together. They travelled to London in early June, arriving at the Grosvenor Square townhouse that Felicity had left nearly a year ago. It looked exactly the same, imposing, elegant, cold, but she was different. She walked through the door, not as a supplicant daughter, but as a woman who had chosen her own path and found happiness in it. Her father lay in his bedchamber, diminished by illness, but still recognizably himself. Lady Ashworth sat beside him, her face drawn with worry and something that might have been regret. Felicity, Lord Ashworth's voice was weak, but clear. You came. Of course I came, Papa. She took his hand, feeling how fragile it had become. I was wrong. The words came with obvious difficulty. About the doctor, about your choices, about what mattered. I see that now. You look happy, truly happy. I don't think I ever saw that before. Tears pricked Felicity's eyes. I am happy, Papa. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Good. That's good. He glanced at Damien, who stood respectfully near the door. Take care of her, Dr. Reed. She's more precious than I understood. I know, sir, and I will. Lord Ashworth lingered for another week, during which Felicity and her mother achieved a tentative reconciliation. Lady Ashworth would never fully approve of her daughter's choices, but she could no longer deny the evidence before her eyes. Felicity was thriving in ways she never had as a society daughter. You were right, her mother admitted one afternoon as they sat in the morning room. I tried to make you into something you weren't, tried to force you into a mold that didn't fit. I thought I was securing your future. Instead, I nearly destroyed it. You did what you thought was right, Felicity said gently. We all did, but I'm grateful it didn't work out as planned. My life now is worth more than any title or estate. When Lord Ashworth passed peacefully in his sleep, Felicity mourned not just the father she had lost, but the relationship they might have had if he had seen her clearly sooner. But she also felt a sense of closure, of circles completing. At the funeral, she saw the Duke and Charlotte from a distance. Charlotte looked unhappy, her beauty dimmed by discontent. The Duke's expression was unreadable, but when his eyes met Felicity's across the churchyard, she saw acknowledgement there, recognition that she had found what he had denied her. After the funeral, as Felicity and Damien prepared to return to Edinburgh, Lady Ashworth pressed a letter into her daughter's hand. Your father wanted you to have this. He wrote it the day before he died. Felicity waited until they were on the train north to read it. Her father's shaky handwriting covered 2 pages, but the message was simple. An apology, a blessing, and a confession that he had always known she was meant for more than the life he had planned for her. He had left her a substantial inheritance, enough to ensure her security and fund her work with the school. He understood. In the end, Felicity said, wiping away tears as the Scottish countryside rolled past the windows. That's something. It's everything, Damien replied, pulling her close. Forgiveness and understanding. Those are the gifts we give each other when we're brave enough. They returned to Edinburgh to find their flat filled with flowers from Felicity's students, notes of welcome and concern. Margaret Campbell had been accepted to the Teacher Training College, the first girl from their school to achieve such a distinction. The other students were thriving, their confidence growing with each lesson. Life settled back into its rhythms. Teaching, research, the comfortable domesticity of 2 people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Felicity's inheritance allowed them to expand the school, to hire more teachers, to reach more girls who needed to know that their lives could be more than what society prescribed. On a golden afternoon in late summer, Felicity stood in the school's small garden, watching her students tend the vegetables they had planted. Margaret was explaining photosynthesis to the younger girls, her face alight with the joy of sharing knowledge. Damien came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Felicity replied. "A year ago, I stood at an altar trembling, expecting a cold vow and a colder future. Instead, I found warmth, purpose, and love. I found myself, and I found you," Damien said softly. "The woman who was always there, just waiting for the chance to bloom." Felicity turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued her when she felt worthless, who had offered partnership when the world offered only ownership. "I've waited for you," she said, echoing the words that had changed everything. "I just didn't know it until you appeared." They kissed in the garden while her students giggled and pretended not to notice, and Felicity felt the absolute rightness of this life she had chosen. Not the life she was supposed to want, not the life society had planned, but the life she had built with her own hands and heart. She had been jilted at the altar, humiliated before all of London, cast out by her family. And from that devastation, she had risen into something far more valuable than a duchess's coronet. She had become fully, authentically herself. The golden cage was a distant memory now. She had learned to fly, and the sky was limitless. As the Edinburgh sun set behind the castle's ancient stones, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Felicity Reed, no longer the trembling girl at the altar, but a woman who had chosen her own destiny, looked out at the life she had built and smiled. She had learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as devastation, that rejection can be redirection, and that the courage to choose yourself is the most revolutionary act of all. Her story was not one of a woman rescued by a man, but of a woman who rescued herself and found a partner worthy of walking beside her. It was a story of transformation, of finding strength in humiliation, purpose in rejection, and love in the most unexpected places. The Duke had said he couldn't marry her, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift imaginable, her freedom. Charlotte had taken what she thought was a prize, only to discover it was a burden. And Felicity, cast aside and humiliated, had discovered that sometimes you must lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need. She had stood trembling at that altar, expecting coldness, duty, and a life half-lived. Instead, she had found warmth, partnership, and a future entirely her own. She had waited her whole life for this, not for a duke or a title, but for the courage to become who she was always meant to be. And in the end, that was the only vow that truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far Felicity's journey has traveled, and whether her story of courage and transformation has touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the life you're meant to live begins the moment the life you planned falls apart.